CA Exam Series. E-Learning. This is Sarah. I am gonna teach you GST classes. Welcome to GST Animation Lectures, innovative and student-friendly. CA Exam Series. Your success begins here. Taxable Events, Supply. Supply with consideration in course or furtherance of business. Import of services with consideration whether or not in course. Furtherance of business. Supply without consideration. Activities treated as supply of goods or supply of services. Activities neither the supply of goods nor the supply of services. Composite and mixed supplies. The incidence of tax is the foundation stone of any taxation system. It determines the point at which tax would be levied, that is the taxable event. Broadly, the controversies related to issues like whether a particular process amounted to manufacture or not, whether the sale was predetermined sale, whether a particular transaction was a sale of goods or rendering of services, etc. The GST laws resolve these issues by laying down one comprehensive taxable event that is supply of goods or services or both. In the GST regime, the entire value of supply of goods and/or services is taxed in an integrated manner, unlike the earlier indirect taxes, which were charged independently either on the manufacture or sale of goods, or on the provisions of services. Concept of supply. Section 7 of CGST Act. Section 7 Meaning and scope of supply. Section 8 Taxability of composite and mixed supplies. Schedule 1 Matters to be treated as supply even if made without consideration. Schedule 2 Matters to be treated as supply of goods or as supply of services. Schedule 3 Matters or transactions which shall be treated neither as supply of goods nor as supply of services. Section 7. The meaning and scope of supply taxable under GST can be understood in terms of following parameters, which can be adopted to characterize a transaction as supply. 1. Supply should be of goods or services. Supply of anything other than goods or services like money, securities, etc. does not attract GST. 2. Supply should be made for a consideration. 3. Supply should be made in the course or furtherance of business. 4. Supply should be made by a taxable person. 5. Supply should be a taxable supply. Some exceptions have been carved out where a transaction is deemed to be a supply even without consideration. Similarly, import of services for a consideration, whether or not in the course or furtherance of business, is treated as supply. There are also cases where a transaction is kept out of scope of supply despite the existence of the above parameters, that is, a list of activities shall be treated as neither supply of goods nor supply of services. In other words, they are outside the scope of GST. Government is also empowered to notify transactions that are to be treated as a supply of goods and not as a supply of services, or as a supply of services and not as a supply of goods. Includes supply for consideration in course or furtherance of business, Section 7(1)(a). Importation of services for consideration whether or not in course or furtherance of business, Section 7(1)(b). Supply without consideration, Section 7(1)(c) plus Schedule 1. Activities to be treated as supply of goods or supply of services, Section 7(1)(d) plus Schedule 2. Modes of supply. Supply includes all forms of supply of goods or services or both. Supply of anything other than goods or services does not attract GST. Goods, every kind of movable property. Service, anything other than goods. excludes money and securities. Sale and transfer. Earlier, VAT was levied by the state on the sale of goods, which was defined under most state VAT laws as transfer of property in goods for consideration. Under the CGST Act, although sale has been treated as a form of supply leviable to GST, the definition of sale has not been provided. Barter and exchange. While barter may deal with a transaction which only includes an exchange of goods, services, exchange may cover a situation where the goods are partly paid for in goods and partly in money. When there is a barter of goods or services, same activity constitutes supply as well as consideration. License, lease, rental, etc. Licenses, leases and rentals of goods were earlier treated as services where the goods were transferred without transfer of right to use. Consideration. One of the essential conditions for the supply of goods and/or services to fall within the ambit of GST is that a supply is made for a consideration. However, consideration does not always mean money. It covers anything which might be possibly done, given or made in exchange for something else. Further, a consideration need not always flow from the recipient of the supply. It can also be made by a third person. Any transaction involving supply of goods and/or services without consideration is not a supply unless it is deemed to be a supply under law, as deemed in Schedule 1 of the CGST Act. In course or furtherance of business. Any activity or transaction which is incidental or ancillary to the aforementioned listed activities. In addition, any activity undertaken by the central government, or a state government, or any local authority in which they are engaged as public authority shall also be construed as business. Supply by a taxable person. A supply to attract GST should be made by a taxable person. Hence, a supply between two non-taxable persons does not constitute taxable supply under GST. It is important to note that supply can be made to a non-taxable person also. Even an unregistered person who is liable to be registered is a taxable person. Similarly, a person not liable to be registered, but has taken voluntary registration and got himself registered is also a taxable person. Taxable supply. For a supply to attract GST, the supply must be taxable. Taxable supply has been broadly defined and means any supply of goods or services or both which is leviable to tax under the GST law. Supply without consideration, deemed supply. 1. Permanent transfer, disposal of business assets. 2. Supply between related person or distinct persons. 3. Principal, agent. 4. Importation of services. Activities to be treated as supply of goods or supply of services. Transfer. Land and building. Treatment or process. Transfer of business assets. Renting of a movable property. Construction of complex, building, civil structure, etc. Works contract services. Negative list under GST. 1. Activities, transactions specified under Schedule 3 in the CGST Act. 2. Activities, transactions notified by the government. Composite and mixed supplies. Section 8 Tax liability on composite and mixed supplies. A composite supply comprising two or more supplies, one of which is a principal supply, shall be treated as a supply of such principal supply, and be a mixed supply comprising of two or more supplies shall be treated as supply of that particular supply that attracts highest rate of tax. In order to determine whether the supplies are composite supplies or mixed supplies, one needs to determine whether the supplies are naturally bundled or not naturally bundled in ordinary course of business. In a composite supply, goods or services or both are bundled owing to natural necessities. The elements in a composite supply are dependent on the principal supply. Principal supply means the supply of goods or services which constitutes the predominant element of a composite supply and to which any other supply forming part of that composite supply is ancillary. Works contract and restaurant services are classic examples of composite supplies. Determination whether the services are bundled in the ordinary course of business. The perception of the consumer or the service receiver. Majority of service providers in a particular area of business provide similar bundle of services. Nature of the various services in a bundle of services are their illustrative indicators. Mixed supply means two or more individual supplies of goods or services, or any combination thereof, made in conjunction with each other by a taxable person. For a single price where such supply does not constitute a composite supply, a supply can be a mixed supply only if it is not a composite supply. As a corollary, it can be said that if the transaction consists of supplies not naturally bundled in the ordinary course of business, then it would be a mixed supply. Mixed supply comprising of two or more supplies shall be treated as supply of that particular supply that attracts highest rate of tax. Composite supply versus mixed supply. Consist of two or more supplies. Consist of two or more supply. Naturally bundled. Not naturally bundled. In conjunction with each other. Though can be supplied independently, still supplied together. Tax liability shall be rate of principal supply. Tax liability shall be the rate applicable to the supply that attracts highest rate of tax. Example, charges applied along with mobile phones. Example, a gift pack comprising of chocolates and sweets. We hope this video helped you in gaining knowledge. See you soon with another video. This is Sarah, signing off.